Hi, I'm Sue Stockdale, and welcome to Series 20 of the Access to Inspiration podcast. In today's episode, 142, we meet Ricky Ellcock, a man who refused to let barriers of race, circumstance, or even his own body dictate the course of his life. From a two-room wooden house in Barbados to the hallowed cricket grounds of England, and then into the skies as Virgin Atlantic's first black 747 captain, Ricky's journey is nothing short of awe-inspiring. You'll hear about his ingenuity as a child, using plastic fruit to practice cricket, the culture shock of moving to an elite English boarding school, and the grit required to overcome career-ending injuries. And then how he rebuilt his life to conquer the aviation world. I think you'll find that today's episode shows Ricky's humour, humility and life lessons of resilience and determination will leave you inspired to aim higher and dream bigger. Welcome to the podcast, Ricky Ellcock. It's lovely to speak to you today.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, I feel I'm getting a double bill today because you've had two amazing careers as a cricketer and an airline pilot. As you reflect back on both of those, which one did you enjoy most?
So I always thought to myself from a very young age, I thought I was going to play test match cricket up until I was 30 years old, retire, and then from then I was going to do my next love, which was flying airplanes. Of course, it didn't quite work out like that, but that was the aim. So I don't know that I like either one of them more than the other. I enjoyed two absolutely amazing careers, and I think most little children would probably choose either professional sportsman or pilot as one of the careers that they do. And I've managed to do both. So I'm very grateful and very blessed.
Well, first take us back to your childhood in Barbados, where you were brought up, and describe what that was like.
I grew up in a two-room wooden house in a very, very poor part of Barbados. I suppose if we were in America or in England or somewhere like that, they would probably say we grew up in the projects. We didn't have toilet, we didn't have a kitchen. The very first recollection of my mum actually was just her crying her eyes out because she couldn't afford to give me and my brother an ice cream. So that was our upbringing. And there was two things that was probably going to get us out of that. One was education, of course, or one was doing something really well. And I was lucky.
And cricket was the first love that you followed. Cricket, of course, is a big deal in Barbados, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. My dad, he had a little radio that he spent hours putting batteries in, and we would sit and listen to this thing, cricket coming from all over the world. And quite often he just wondered what India was like or what Pakistan, what Australia was like. And that was probably the first bug that I had, that I wanted to travel. I wanted to see these things. I wanted to see these places. But as I said, cricket, it was difficult to do because we didn't have money to buy equipment or shoes or anything like that. So a lot of it was done on a real cheap. I started by playing with my mum, decorative fruits. My mum would have a set of plastic fruits on the table, and it usually be an orange, an apple, a pear. And we would start with the orange because that was the more circular thing. And we would bash that around until it was destroyed. And then we move on to the apple and then to the pear. And in the back was a little coconut branch that my mom usually cut a little bit off and shaped it into a handle. And we used that. So that's how I started.
And you became known as a fast bowler ultimately and represented England.
Yeah, I went to secondary school in Barbados, which was sort of my first bit of luck. I sat the common entrance exam in Barbados. It's a grammar school system in Barbados. I sat the exam and I passed for a school by the name of Combermere. Now, Combermere is an incredibly high achieving school. This is a school where the first Prime Minister of Barbados went. Rihanna went to Combermere. There's a couple of English boys playing now that went to Combermere. Even in my own England side, there was a guy by the name of Gladstone Small that went to school to Combermere. So back in 1990, we had two Combermereans in the England side. So that was my first introduction. And this school obviously was very good at pushing cricketers. And I turned up at Combermere, only having played with plastic fruits from my mum. And the boys were playing serious cricket. And I decided that I would try it. I went off and tried it. And bearing in mind that we had ranges ranging from 10 years old all the way to 18, 19 years old. And one of the bigger boys, he said to me, look, I'll give you 25 cents for your slot at batting. And I said, well, you must be crazy. I've been waiting a week to have a go. And he just gave me a little slap across the head and said, look, can you go and feel them both? So I went off to one of the other bigger boys and I said, look, he's just took the bat off me. And the other guy said, well, you should have taken the 25 cents. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to get any satisfaction from these people. See, the only thing that I could do was to go and get the ball and try and bowl as fast as I could at this fella. And that's basically how it all started.
And as you were learning to play cricket and doing well, Ricky, you mentioned you had a brother. Was there an interest from your brother in sport as well?
Yeah, my brother also played for Barbados. We both played. The problem is that I came to England and the rest of my family didn't. But my brother stayed in Barbados and he eventually played on the 15, on the 19, and even for senior team Barbados. So that interest in the back garden, playing with a plastic orange, even transcended into my brother as well.
Fantastic. Now, coming over to England, that must have been quite a culture shock coming from Barbados to Malvern, I understand.
Yeah, Malvern College, as you probably know, one of the very prestigious public schools in England. This is a place that is so alien to Barbados, it might as well have been on the moon. And I turned up at Malvern as the only black boy in the school. I went into sort of sensory overload. Everything that I saw was new. Everything that I smelt was new. Everything I heard, everything I touched, taste, everything was new. I'd never worn a jacket. I'd never seen a color TV. A toaster was so alien to me that it wasn't funny. The first time that I saw a toaster, one of the guys got up and took some bread over and put it in this thing. And I thought, what are you doing? And then he came back with burnt bread. I thought, well, why in God's earth would you do something like that? I remember turning up in one of the classrooms and one of the kids, he said to me, do you like the jam? And I said, well, what kind? And he said, well, not the ones that you eat. This is a band, you know. There was all kinds of things like that, as well as snow and cold. And I'd never worn a jumper. Shoes were fairly alien to me at the time. All kinds of things, as well as being the only black boy in the school.
So how did you cope with such a sensory overload, as you describe it?
Well, with great difficulty. I went into, I would say, probably meltdown a few times. There are a couple of times when I thought to myself, I can't do this. I need to go back home. As a matter of fact, one time I phoned my mom. I said to her, look, I can't do this. I need to come home. And I remember my dad was obviously sitting next there. And bearing in mind that he absolutely loved cricket. He loved England. He wanted his son to be at school. All the old scholars in Barbados had all been to Oxford and Cambridge and LSE and things like that. So to get a son of his to be going to England was something, there's no way that he could ever do that. And so here I was in England doing something that he could never do. And I remember he took the phone off my mum and he said, listen, you got an opportunity, now get on with it. And he put the phone down. I thought, okay, well, if I ain't going to get any satisfaction from those two, I might as well stay, you know.
Sometimes we have to have that tough love to give us a bit of motivation to keep us going.
Absolutely.
So the cricket then developed and you debuted for Worcestershire, I understand, when you were 16.
Yeah, I went into the Worcester side at 16. So I came over at 15. And that same summer, I'd done well enough that Worcester signed me on a summer contract. So I played for them during the summer. And I was supposed to actually return to Barbados during the summer holidays. And so I never went home. I came here in April and I spent the whole summer. And the next time I actually went back to Barbados was in December. But that first summer of playing professional cricket as a 16-year-old amongst the big boys, these were big boys. And that was such an experience, as you could imagine. In the professional game, training, working hard, meeting girls, music, driving in cars, coaches. I'd never seen a coach, you know, and here was coaches. And not only they had toilets in them and stuff like that. This was just amazing stuff for me. But I absolutely loved it.
And when you were playing then for Worcestershire, and did you have the ambition then that if you could keep moving forward, you could get a place in England?
At that stage, I had it because I grew up in Barbados, wanted to play for the West Indies. As you can imagine, the West Indies was the best side in the world at the time. And all of us kids, we loved Viv Richards or Michael Holden or whoever was in the West Indies side. And so my objective at that stage was to play for the West Indies. And of course, I was desperate to go back home and play cricket back home and get my name heard. So I didn't actually think about playing for England at that time. That particular scenario came a little bit later.
And then, of course, an unexpected situation occurred when your father died.
Yeah, I went back to Barbados for the first time. So I've been in England. I came at 15. So I played for Worcester that summer, didn't go home. And I went back to Barbados in December. So December, Christmas. There's a test match going on in Australia. The West Indies are playing Australia, which is a huge rivalry. And we are listening to this thing, and suddenly I heard this like fall in the bedroom. And I gone in and I thought, well, he's just had a little bit too much to drink and he's just lying on the floor. And I didn't realize that he had died. Next time my mum came home and said, look, I don't think he's breathing. And sometimes I still beat myself up and think, maybe you should have done something. But at 16, you don't know what you're doing.
And at that point then, did you feel that you should stay then in Barbados?
At that stage, my mum instantly said, you've got to go back to England. Now, she might have had reasons for this, bearing in mind that my dad had just died. She's now got 3 children that she's going to have to look after by herself. And one of them in England being looked after by the school is probably not a bad thing. The other thing is that she probably realized that I needed to be educated properly because that was another reason of how I was going to be able to help her in the future. So she said, right, you got to go back. No matter what's happened here, you go back to England and get on with your education.
And then as your education continued, that injury then was the next biggest challenge that you faced while you were developing as a cricketer.
At 16 years old, I could probably bowl a ball near enough 90 miles an hour. And this is something that puts an enormous stress through your body. And I don't think that I was quite built for it. I was very young. I was still growing. Although I could bowl this ball quickly, the workload soon take its toll. The other thing is that when you find a kid or a young person that can bowl a ball at 90 miles an hour, everybody wants a piece of them. So I was 16. I was playing on the 17. I was playing on the 19. I was playing on the 25, playing second team for Worcester, first team for Worcester within a year of that. And the workload just became too much. And it ended badly with a serious back injury. 17, 18, 19 is when all of these injuries were started. Once I'd been selected for England, I was 23 or something like that, and I selected for England. But these injuries had obviously manifested themselves from the time I was 17, 18, 19, and I got to the Caribbean and this injury reemerged. I tried everything. So I tried everything to try and solve this injury. I had acupuncture that I wasn't authorized to have. The manager of the England team at the time wasn't terribly happy. I had a guy phone me in the hotel room and said, look, Ricky, I think if you go out and buy a can of WD-40 and spray it on your back, that'll get rid of the pain. Now, I went out and did that, and nothing worked. But eventually what they found was that I had 6 stress factors. So no end of WD-40 or acupuncture was ever going to cure that.
So it strikes me that today it's so different. Sports people are having to pay attention to their body, and those around them supporting them are making sure that they're paying attention to their health and well-being. I'm just wondering whether there was support in those days, or whether it was because you were so good at bowling, then it was more about playing all the time rather than thinking about the long-term career.
In the 80s, there were very little thought about long-term career. A lot of things have changed. For instance, back in the 80s, after bowling, we used to come off the pitch and you would have a hot bath. They would all tell you that's crazy today. You should have a ice bath. They didn't tell you much about eating or drinking or anything like that. A lot of that stuff was left up to the individual. Now everybody manages players' workload. Nobody did that back in our time. I would finish playing a first class game and they say, oh, the under 17s, Worcester under 17s has got a game tomorrow. Can you go and play for them? And I would go off and play for them, and it was just, nobody would say, well, look, this is too much for this guy. Now you got dietitians that's telling people what to eat. West Indies store, my first roommate was Nasser Hussain, captain of England eventually. And I caught up with Nasser after years of him playing. And I said, Nas, you finally give up. I mean, come on, you should have given up years ago. And he said to me, Ray, I've finally had enough of the carb load and eating pasta for breakfast and going to sleep at the certain time to organize my circadian rhythm. We knew nothing of that stuff back in the 80s.
I imagine it must have been quite difficult thinking that your body is going to let you down just when you need it the most.
Yeah, because I had periods of plaster cast, as you've probably read in the book. I had times 3, 4, 5 months in plaster cast with a body which started at the top of it from my throat and reached all the way to my private parts. And I would have that on for months at end. So I'd been through all these things and I got over them and moved on. Always in the back of my mind that it could happen again. And I knew the little triggers that I could feel. And when I on the England tour, I had those triggers. I could feel them. And I'd said to the manager, I've got little aches in my body. I used to start with a little pain, usually in my stomach, almost like you have an appendix. And then it would go into my groin, the back of my legs. And then eventually I would get pins and needles. And if I pushed it completely, eventually I'd be projectile vomiting. So I knew the sort of triggers that was coming. And I just could not get rid of it in time to play those games.
Well, you said a moment ago there, well, I just got on with it. And I thought many people just wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
That would cause them to give up in the first place.
Yeah.
How do you have that determination and resilience? What is it that you're thinking or saying to yourself to just keep going?
As I said to you earlier, I came out of Redman Village, right? A little settlement in Barbados. We were poor. Suddenly I had an opportunity. I was this close to making the big time. And I just was not going to give up. It wasn't in my makeup. I was the kind of child growing up that if you told me I couldn't do something, I would do it. You probably would have said I had ADHD when I was a kid. And I had got to the point in my career that I was so close that there was no way in God's earth that I was ever going to give up until it was going to kill me or cripple me. And that's eventually what was going to happen.
So after 6 stress fractures and then an operation, what happened when you had to stop playing? How did you cope with all of that?
I had first 6 stress fractures, which they did an operation. And my stress fractures were weird because most people have stress fractures as L5, number 5. Normally what they do is they fuse them together and you can probably get back to playing. Mine was L3, 4, and 5. So I had stress fractures along fairly much a big section of my back. They could not fuse them because it would mean that I wouldn't have the movement to continue playing. So they had to come up with a sort of new surgery, which was basically to draft bone off my hip and to graft them into the individual cracks and then just screw them all together with titanium screws and hope that that worked. I actually came back, played for a little bit of time, a year, and then I was in pain again. And we went back in to see what happened, and the operation found out that I'd cracked basically titanium screws and broken a lot of the bones again. So they had to completely redo the operation, the same training, a whole year of rehab again. And then it happened again. And that was eventually when they said to me, look, we can't do any more operations. You need to stop. This thing is going to cripple you. And then I went into massive depression. As you could imagine, I was 24 years old, 25 years old. And here, the thing that I wanted to do for a long time was finished. There's plenty of days soon that I thought about just walking out the road and jumping in front of a train or something. I thought the world was about to come to an end.
I can imagine when you've worked so hard for your dream and then your body takes it away from you.
Yeah, your body says no.
Yeah. So out of that depression, out of that dark place, how did you turn things around then and become an airline pilot?
Well, my depression started to manifest itself apart from sort of the mental issues that I had. I also had physical issues. I would get really bad headaches. I had like tunnel vision. I could not see out the side of me for some reason. And my heart rate sometimes would just go through the roof. I could hear this thing beating in the top of my head. I started to think, I've got cancer, I've got brain tumors, I've got all kinds of things. And I had a little bit of luck here again. My wife at the time, she got a number of doctors in her family. And she said, look, go and see my mum. Something's not right here. So I went off and saw Mary and said, look, Mary, I've got HIV. I've got brain tumors. I've got this. So she did all these tests. And eventually she came back and she said, Ray, you know what you've got? You've got depression. I said, but Mary, I can't see. She says it manifests itself like that. I said, but my heart goes really fast sometimes. She says, well, that's a panic attack. There was all these things. And she said, what you need is to get out of this country where you can't see or hear anything about cricket. And that's basically what I did. So I put a backpack on and I went to America, started in Miami and spent 3 months traveling America.
And did you manage to stop thinking about cricket and start to think about other things?
Yeah, all these places that I'd seen on the telly, they want to do the big cities. They didn't want to do LA. They want to do New York. I went to Amarillo, Texas. I went to Boise, Idaho. These kinds of places up in Seattle and all of these. And as I went through this, I found that my vision got better. These panic attacks didn't start as much. So suddenly I thought to myself, okay, maybe this is in my mind for real. And by the time I got back to England from that tour, my wife had come up with some magazine. She said, right, you need to start thinking about hobbies and stuff like that, something that's going to keep your mind off this stuff. And a part of those magazines was airplane. And I'd always had a love of airplane. As you'd probably read in the book, as a 12-year-old, I'd been on an aircraft carrier in Barbados, saw airplanes landing on this thing, managed to wangle my way into sit down in one of these airplanes and gone home and said to my dad, look, I'd quite like to be a pilot. And he said, black people don't fly airplanes. That did two things for me. One, I didn't realize that being black could stop me from doing anything. And the second thing, I thought, I'm going to show you that I could do this. So suddenly that was it again. Back had something to aim for again.
And it strikes me that when somebody says to you, I bet you can't do that, that's the very thing that motivates you to do it.
Always was. Even as a kid, my mum would tell you. Then she said, don't climb that ladder. I went up the ladder. Don't jump off that step. I jumped off the step. I don't know why that was. It's just something that's always been with me. If you give me something that I can't do, I try and do it. That's just me.
It can be a powerful motivation for anybody.
Yeah, and I was going to prove my dad wrong. I'd always had a sort of aim that I was going to play test match cricket up until I was 30 years old. I knew that. And at 30 years old, I'd have played 50 test matches. I was going to give up, and then I was going to go and fly planes and prove to him that I could fly airplanes, a black person. And I always thought to myself, I would have loved him to be at the airport when I landed the first jumbo back into Barbados. Can you imagine what that would have been like? And so I told you.
That would have been amazing.
Yeah.
And if you're enjoying Ricky's story, there are hundreds of other inspiring episodes for you to listen to. And we wanted to make it even easier for you to find those episodes. So we've reorganised our website to help you discover content with ease. We've now got 15 categories, ranging from sustainability and climate actions to sport and physical challenges. Just hop on over to accesstoinspiration.org to discover many more conversations with inspiring guests. Now back to Ricky. Now, given that these days it's well over £100,000 for anybody to train to become a pilot, you were doing it on a shoestring, and how then did that influence how you went through the exam process?
I was doing it on half a shoestring. I had very little money. Obviously, I saved a little bit during cricket. I got a little bit of an insurance payout, remortgaged the house. I had very little money. But what it did do is focus my mind. I knew that I had one attempt at every exam, and I just worked and worked and worked. I don't think in the 2 and a bit years that I was in flight school that I went to the pub. I didn't go to the cinema. Every great moment was in those books, making sure that I passed those exams first time, because otherwise I was going to run out of money.
And do you think that the experience of being a professional sports person and some of the ways that you managed your mind and went about playing sport, that helped you when it came to being a pilot?
Oh, absolutely. I think every professional sportsman has to be dedicated. You have to have a major work ethic. Otherwise, you're simply not going to be able to do it. Teamwork, communication, leadership qualities, time management. You're playing a match. You got to work out probably 2 days before how you're going to get yourself ready to be able to bowl or bat that first ball on 11 o'clock the first morning of a game. And that's exactly the same in aviation. I've got a flight that's scheduled to leave at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's no point turning up at 9:30. I'm going to let the company down, the passengers down, and of course, my crew down. So there's a lot of parallels between the sports.
And now, once you passed your flight exams, how did you get your first job then as an airline pilot?
With great difficulty. So I wrote hundreds of letters, hundreds, to heaps of airlines all over the world. And I could not get a job. I just could not get one. And I had friends of mine that been through flight school with me, and they've got jobs. So this is making it worse. I'm sitting down looking and thinking, oh, I flew in. He failed meteorology or he failed flight planning or something. And he's got a job. I pass all of those things. and I haven't got one. And that really, really played on my mind. And eventually, I got a job in the Caribbean. I didn't get one in England. So I had to go to the Caribbean and do my flying there.
And eventually then, in terms of becoming a captain, that with Virgin Airlines?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
So I went to the Caribbean and did a lot of flying. I was determined that I'd spent, in those days, £80,000 on a pilot license. And I was determined that I was going to fly the best thing that I could fly. Now, the best thing would have probably been Concorde, I suppose, but that was only being flown by BA and Air France. So the chances of me getting one of those two was probably zero. So the next thing was a 747. And so I used to write off to all these airlines and say, look, I've got another 100 hours. I've got another 200 hours. Do you fancy having a look at me now? And eventually, one day I got a letter from Virgin Atlantic saying, look, we'd like you to come for an interview. And so I did whatever I had to do it. And I did some really stuff to try and get back to England to do that interview. Because I was working for an airline that they weren't really wanting me to be leaving to go anywhere else. Anyway, I got back, did the interview, and I always remember this, a little bit of luck again. You know, you need luck in life. And one of the guys that did the interview, he said at the end of it, he came over to me and he said, Ray, which part of Barbados are you from? And I said, oh, do you know Barbados quite well? I'm not assuming that he would know Barbados. And he said, yeah, my wife is from Barbados. I would guess that he put the word in for me. And I joined Virgin in 1997 as a second officer.
Fantastic. That must have been very pleasing for you.
Oh, it was the pinnacle on the 747. Again, I just worked really hard, you know, because we had tested, we checked. This is stuff going on the whole time in the aviation industry. So I just worked really hard, did all the tests I can. And within 7 years, I experienced enough, and they offered me a command, which I managed to pass the check, get through it all. And I was a captain of a 747, the first black captain that Virgin had ever heard. So it was a good thing.
I wonder if that phrase from your dad stuck in your mind at that point, black people don't fly planes.
Absolutely. On the 4th of October, 2001, so just after September 11th, they swapped the 747 to the routes in the Caribbean. And I did the inaugural Caribbean on the 747. And I could still remember sitting at the end of the runway thinking, man, I would so wish. There were two people that I wish was still alive. One was my housemaster, Mr. Duff, back at Malvern, who had done so much for me to make sure that I was comfortable in England. But the other guy was my dad. I would have loved those two guys to be around to see this happen. My dad to see that thing land at the Grattley Adams International Airport in Barbados. A son of his who had come out of Rema Village with hardly anything to eat properly, and to actually fly a 747 back into the country, you know.
What an accolade, what a memory.
Amazing.
So having had those two careers as a pilot and a professional sports person, Ricky, if there was somebody that has ambition and a big dream today and is limited in resources, what would be your advice to them if they want to have passion to achieve something?
Go for it. So go for it. I always say it's better to try and fail than to fail having not tried. It's hard. You're going to need dedication. You're going to need all these things that I told you about earlier. But the only way that you're ever going to find out whether you could do something, anything, is to try it and to give it your all once you've tried it. Just work at it like a crazy person until you succeed.
And if you were going back to give your 14-year-old self some advice, heading to Malvern, knowing now what you know about your life and your experiences, what advice would you have given to yourself?
So I started the book, right? Balls to Fly. I started it with a quote from Nelson Mandela. And I'm paraphrasing here. It doesn't matter how many times you fall down. What matters is how many times you get up. Yeah. And that's what I would say to my 14-year-old self. You're going to have lots of falls, you know, but keep getting up. Every time you fall down, get up and keep going. And that's the only advice that I think I would give to anybody, to tell the truth. You just don't lie down.
The listener, that getting to that pinnacle again as a pilot, it wasn't without incident afterwards. And health has caused you another setback.
Yeah, absolutely. So even in the later chapters in the book, I had a brain bleed. And let me tell you, one day in particular, in aviation, of course, we are doing medicals every 6 months, every year. In this particular incident, I fell down some stairs on the 747. As a matter of fact, I just landed back from Barbados, tired, fell down the stairs and ruptured my quadricep tendon. Now, this is sort of bit ironic because I'd played 10 years of professional sport and never snapped a quadricep tendon. And here I was flying an airplane and snapped one. Now, I went off and they fixed that. Took them a few months to sort it out and whatever. And then I came back flying. But as soon as I came back, I sort of started to have headaches and really weird things. And I was coming back from LA and I'm on the Dreamliner now, which is the 787. And I'm flying back and suddenly I lost all coordination. My eyes has gone funny, headaches out of this world. So I had to stood myself down, declare a mayday, and basically they sent an ambulance once we had landed to take me to the hospital. And the culmination of that was that I had a brain bleed, something called a subdural hematoma. Now, this is really weird because when you play professional cricket as a fast bowler, you get something, a hematoma under your toe, the front foot of your foot, every summer. It just happened. So when she turned, obviously I was worried I had brain tumors again and stroke and all kinds of things. And she turned and she said, "Oh, you've got a subdural hematoma." And I thought it was going to be something serious, because in cricket, they would come in with a little drill, punch a hole in the toe, and then they just strap it up and you'll be off playing again. But she said to me, "Look, you're so lucky that you're not dead already. You ain't going home now. This need to be sorted out." It took them 4 operations to sort it out.
Oh my goodness. And did you at that point be reflecting back on the previous health challenges you'd had and think, here we go again?
Yes, I absolutely. At the time, I was doing my master's. So all this is going on doing my master's. And after the first operation, my thesis for my master's was due in about a month. And I needed to write it up, format it, and all of that. So I was saying to this guy, "Look, get my head sorted so that I can go and do this thesis. 'Cause I ain't about to fail that because of this." And he said, "Well, I don't think you should be doing nothing like that." But anyway, they released me from hospital. I went off to this internet cafe and I just find a way to get my thesis up to the eventually when the thesis had been submitted. By then I was back with headaches again. I went back to the hospital and they said, "Oh, the bleed is returned." I thought, "Oh my God." Anyway, they operated again, released me. And within a few days, I was back in hospital because the bleed had returned. And then finally, a major seizure in the bathroom at St. Mary's Hospital when I would have died. There were a couple of things that were driving me forward. One, I thought to myself, maybe tomorrow, your mum is outside waiting to see you. Maybe tomorrow you could die tomorrow, but not today. Not today. And that drove me forward to make sure that I just held on and held on and held on until somebody could find me. Eventually, they did an MRI, found out that basically it was a membrane that had shifted my brain. So my brain had shifted. So apart from anything else, so I still got all my fingers. I could still see. I could talk. They think that's a little bit of a miracle that that's happened because most people this thing actually kills. And then if it doesn't kill you, usually you're not much use to anything else. But I've managed to come through it.
It's amazing. And yes, listener, he's looking healthy and well as I see him on the computer screen here.
And the fingers were.
You're just so determined and focused, Ricky. So even although that your health has put your flying career on hold for now, what else is taking up your energy and your focus?
Well, obviously, this book is out. I sat down. I had nothing to do. I can't fly. The doctors hasn't signed me off to fly. So I needed something to do. And I sat down and wrote this book. The title of the book is Balls to Fly. And obviously, it's a play on cricket balls and stuff like that. But also, it's a little bit of a play on having the kahunas to do something that my dad said I could not do. He had said black people didn't fly. Well, I managed to prove to him that black people could.
And how can people find the book online?
Yeah, this is on Amazon. It's in all major bookshops. There's a link which is basically thenightwatchman.net. That's the publisher. He's published it. So they're selling it through that there. But all major bookshops have it. And there's plenty on Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, it's been such a fascinating conversation with you, Ricky. I think you're so inspiring, and I think that determination and resilience is what I'm taking away from our conversation today. What are some of the things that have helped you?
Well, I'll tell you, when I played cricket, I was in a dressing room with, 20 odd people, and you would look around and you judge your talent on there. You're looking and you're thinking, oh, that guy's done such and such. If he can do that, I could. The same thing when I came into flying. I would sit in the flight deck as a first officer, second officer, and I would look at the captain, and I think to myself, okay, if he can do that, I can do that. And I think you have to find these little triggers. If you're sitting somewhere and you're not sure that you can do something, look for these little triggers in other people and think, if he can do that, that's how you fix your mind. If he can do that, I can do that. And just aim high, really high. Don't just think I can fly a jumbo. I want to fly the space shuttle. That's what I always say to the kids that I try and mentor. I says, a black guy is flying a 747. Now you as a black kid should be aiming to fly a space shuttle. That's what I think people should think about it.
Well, it's a lovely ending to our conversation. I think the listener will be thinking, well, if Ricky can do all of that, I can do anything.
Absolutely. And the final bit, a captain at Virgin once said to me, don't kick anybody on the way up because you'll pass them on the way down.
Some wise advice as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today, Ricky. It's been a brilliant conversation, and I wish you well and enjoying that cricket that you're going to be watching again soon.
Okay, absolutely. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks to Ricky Ellcock for such an inspiring story. And if you want to connect with him or find out more about his book, Balls to Fly, you can get all the links on the website. Just hop on over to accesstoinspiration.org. And if you want to keep up to date with us, please connect with us on social media. You'll find us at Access to Inspiration. And subscribe so that you will get all the latest episodes when they are published. Next time, I'll be talking to Astrid Vargas, a leading conservation biologist known for her groundbreaking work in endangered species recovery. I hope you can join us then.